So the starter hasn't really risen much since having taken it out of the fridge this morning, but the smell has changed. So it doesn't really smell so much like pancakes to me anymore. What does it smell like?
It smells sweet, like grapes.
Okay, so there's a bit of a fruity, fruitiness to it, and that's an indication that the starter is getting stronger, so more potent, able to process more dough quicker is when you start to get that stronger, fruitier, maybe slightly alcohol-y sort of smell.
Yeah.
So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to discard some of that starter because it's not rising anymore, and it's been long enough that it really should be rising.
Just half again?
Do half, maybe a little more than half, maybe like 60% of it, 70% of it. And because every starter is different and we're all operating under different conditions, temperatures, humidities, with different flour a lot of the time, you really have to develop an idea of the smell of the starter and just keep feeding the starter and discarding after it's risen. And that will give you more of an idea of the unique characteristics of your particular flour and sort of starter situation. So with ours, because I have some experience with this, I know that that smell is an indication that our starter is closer to being ready to feed a little bit more flour than usual. So we're going to do like 2 big scoops, and from there we'll be able to hopefully see a lot of rise over the course of the next few hours this afternoon. And if that's the case, we'll be able to move on. But if we don't see that aggressive, rapid rise, we have to continue to feed a little bit, discard a little bit, feed a little bit, discard a little bit, watch for that rise and fall until the starter is rising really quickly. We don't want to move on to the next step of baking until we're getting that explosive rise. So hopefully we'll see that this evening. Lia just asked me a good question that I should explain, and it's why did we put more in this time? Why did we put 2 scoops instead of 1? And it's because I'm anticipating a good rise out of this. I'm hoping that it really explodes up and we show a really good fast rise. And if it does, the next step is going to be to divide the starter so that some of it stays as a starter. We'll feed it, we'll put it in the fridge just so that we have it moving forward for future bakes. And the other half we're actually going to bake with, because if you think about it, if you use all of your starter in the loaf of bread you're going to bake, and then you bake it, you've killed all of your starter, and you'd have to start from this whole process again. Normally all you have to do is pull the starter out of the fridge, feed it once, and then you can bake. So you're usually ready to bake the next day kind of thing. So this time I'm expecting there to be a split, so we're going to be taking half of the starter or a little bit more and carrying that forward into the leaven, and if that's the case then great, and if not, if we have to keep feeding and discarding from this one, if it hasn't risen quick enough, then we're just throwing away a little bit more flour and it's not that big a deal. So we'll check in later and see how it is. I'm beginning to realize that putting it in the fridge last night was a huge mistake, so hopefully you haven't done that. But if you have, then you might have to do the same thing I'm doing, which is just to leave it out and let it really just proof like crazy. Let it get overproofed. It might rise all the way up and then drop again. And we might have to let that go a few times because it still hasn't fully risen since we fed it this afternoon. It's risen a bit, but really slowly, and that's not enough rise speed to bake on. Yeah, so that's what we're looking at since like 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock today. And that's not nearly fast enough of a rise for us to be able to commit this starter to a larger batch of dough, which is the next step, and I'm not confident in taking that next step until this is rising, like tripling, quadrupling in size in a matter of a few hours with this type of temperature. Like it was 24, 25, 26 degrees today, so definitely warm enough for this to have risen faster. So we're gonna leave it out overnight, and this last bit at the top, which isn't quite fermented yet, will be consumed. It'll probably rise a little bit more, and then we might even see it deflate again once the yeast has eaten up all that fresh flour. So this morning Lia was having a look at the starter, and what were you saying?
I was saying that it looks like it didn't rise, but it does have more bubbles. Like I'm noticing more activity happening.
Those are good observations. One thing to look closely for is for the sign of it having risen and then fallen, and that's something you'll be able to notice by a thin...
Yeah, you can see that thin
film all the way around.
Oh,
it's going to be tricky for me to capture that on camera. I'll see if I can get yeah, you can see it.
So it looks like it rose up about to here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it focused. There we go. I think that's showing it. There's a very thin film about a centimeter above where it is now, where you can see that the starter has risen, and it's risen to about here and then fallen. So overnight it made its way up, didn't get any food, so it's eaten all of the fresh dough, and then it started to fall. So this is actually a really good sign that we should feed it, because it's already eaten all of it. So let's give that a refresh.
Okay.
What's it smell like today?
Still sweet, but like stronger. It doesn't smell good to me. Like, doesn't smell appetizing.
Pretty much just pours out now. It's so liquidy and overproofed. I'm gonna have a smell before, just to get a sense of. That's actually what we want.
Okay.
It's starting to take on more of a, like a little bit more of a pungent smell to it. I didn't like before when we'd leave it for a long time and it still smelled fresh.
Oh, okay.
But a little bit sour, kind of like sour pancake batter. I didn't like that. This is now starting to smell the way we want it to, which is more, I can only really describe it as a little bit more like vinegary.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. And usually it's an indication that we'll get better rise. We'll see. So I'll finish feeding that thing.
Just one spoonful?
Let's do two big scoops this time, in case it does rise explosively, and then we'll be able to divide and advance.
Woo.
And we're in line for a fairly hot day today, so conditions are favorable for a fast rising starter.
Okay, so will it rise and fall every time?
No, we just want it to rise. If we let it fall, then we've kind of missed our opportunity to keep the yeast at their hungriest. So we want to feed them. We want to discard half the starter and then add fresh flour and water at the very peak of the rise.
Okay.
So we don't want to let it fall every time.
But it's okay if it happens once.
Oh yeah,
because that happened last night.
Oh yeah, it's okay. It's okay if it happens every time. It's just ideal to feed it at the peak of rise.
Cool.
Realistically, it's not going to be timed perfectly, so you'll be feeding it after it's risen fully, dropped a little bit. When the starter's stronger, you'll be able to feed it when it's almost at its peak, and it won't matter. It'll still make its way all the way up after it's been fed freshly. Sure. And now we're actually going to do a new marking system. We're going to rub out the dry erase marker, and we're just going to put an elastic band on the jar.
And you can use elastic bands the entire time, we just didn't have.
Yeah, we just didn't have one. And now we do. So we're going to use an elastic to mark the starting point. And there's our other little starter.
She's growing rapidly.
She grows really quickly. I'm still struggling here to get my starter going, and I think what might have happened is Lia and I have been dividing, discarding, and feeding it too frequently. What can happen is you're discarding more active yeast than the yeast is able to sort of reproduce, and your starter ends up kind of going extinct, because you think about it, you're taking those microorganisms, you're throwing them in the garbage, you're adding new flour and water dough, and you're expecting the yeast to quickly eat that and repopulate. But if they're not doing that fast enough, you're just throwing out all your active yeast, and I think that might be what we've done. And I'm seeing not a lot of rise at all, so I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. I'm gonna leave this for a while. I might even let it rise and then fall again. That way I know for sure the yeast have fully populated this starter, and then I will discard a little bit less than I otherwise would, and add some fresh flour and water to feed those obviously active yeast. And hopefully we'll start getting better rise out of it, because it's hot today. It's going up to 30, and there's no excuse for this to be going really slowly. So let's backpedal and see if we can't get some progress.